Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about React's hooks. The two main hooks we're going to focus on are state hooks and effect hooks. Now, with that being said, what is a hook? A hook is kind of the idea that we are going to access different parts of React's internal states in order to create the same types of functionalities we see with class components. So if you notice here, I've come up with a structure that has the app as a function, as well as the components that we're going to use as functions as well. To prove to you that functions can work in kind of different ways, I have one component that is a pure functional component and one that is a little less traditional of an arrow function component. In class components, we usually see these kind of arrow function const components, and they can be used in the same way. So just to prove to you that there are two strategies, we're going to be working through both of them. Now, what we're going to be doing is kind of a pseudo social media site. I've defined some comments that are relevant to each post, and we're going to basically take these and set them up such that we can add comments to a particular post and see it reflected in these statistics. So let's get started. So as I said, this is really just a method to show you guys how to use hooks, and it assumes that you already know enough about class components to be able to render that kind of thing. So let's introduce the state hook. To enact that, I'm first going to add a particular import statement. So from use state is the keyword that we need to introduce state hooks. Similar to class components, we do have state variables, and also similar to class components, we still cannot update the state correctly, meaning that we have to set up ahead of time how we're going to update those states. So let's say that we want to update this particular variable. It is true that I could just take the length of each of these and combine them, but for the sake of this demo, we're going to define it as its own variable. So let's say var total comments so in defining state, unlike class components, we do not have to place it inside of the object state. What we do have to do is we're going to define it in a setter getter context. So whenever you define something for state, it's always going to have the first parameter as the getter. So if you want to access it later, what is the name of the variable? And the setter, if you want to update the state variable. Just like in class components, you cannot do this dot state equals something. We have to update it in a different way. Most of the time, we're going to update it with set total comments. But in use state, at the very beginning, we can use a particular state to initialize it. So this is where use state comes in. So we're going to say use state, and let's assume that'll be 0. Now we're able to pass this down as a property such that it'll be updated here. So for example, in post.jsx, you see that currently this is set to 0. And I'm going to show you guys the same way that you would usually pass it down in the class component. You would add props here. And then from here, we're able to access what props is. Again, this assumes that you already know how to use props since you've done class components. So let's say total comments equals the object total comments. So this could be called anything. It's just a variable name that will be used later on. And I'm also just going to pass okay. So now on the other side, we can access them. So total and we want to wrap these in brackets. And then props.total comments. Great. So right now we still have not updated total comments. So what I'm going to show you guys is how you can update it on the fly. Now I'm going to keep this as a static variable because we're not going to be updating the posts, only the comments. Let's practice the state hook that we just made by updating this internal variable to become a state variable. As you guys remember, we're going to have it in the setter getter form. The getter is going to remain as comments, and then the setter is always going to be set followed by the getter. And now we need to update this to be use state, because we can never update the state directly. Okay. Good practicing. So now that we kind of know what a state hook might look like, let's see how we would update that, and let's include our other hook. So our other kind of hook is going to be the use effect. Make sure we import that. Great. The use effect function. So similar to use state, which is also a function, we're going to be passing in a particular value that helps define the rest of our internal React state. In this case, that value is going to be an arrow function. So it's going to look like this. And now inside this arrow function, we want to do something to set our total comments to be how many comments there actually are. So there'd be 3 plus 12 plus 5. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we can say we're going to use this function, which I'll explain in a bit, to set the total number of comments. So let's talk about what use effect actually means. Use effect refers to a replacement for things like component did mount, component did unmount, and other similar characteristics from class components that we're familiar with. Now, use effect is just saying whenever anything changes on the page, we're going to update it. So let's look at that. So for example, the first time anything updates on the page is when we load it for the very first time. When we load it for the very first time, we want this to be replaced. Let's make sure this is going to render. So we're getting total comments, and right now total comments is set to 0, which is why it's being passed down. If I set it to 1, this should update too. All right, now let's try updating it dynamically. So what do we want to happen? We need to count how many comments there are. So I'm going to say, this is just a basic for loop. So we have let comments. Notice that when I access comments, I can do this without saying this.state. It's because pure functional components allow us to reference this as a normal variable. It means that we don't have to worry about saying this.state.comments. All right. So now we have figured out how many comments there are. Now we need to actually replace this value. The way that we do that is by just using the setter. This is a function whose only purpose is to update this variable. So we can do set total comments to be some comments. So now you see that it is 1, 2, 3 plus 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Okay, great. So that looks awesome. So in other words, whenever the page loads, this will reflect how many comments there are listed in the state. Now, something we're going to add, which we might not need, is that use effect has a special extra aspect called dependencies. Dependencies say that whenever this particular variable changes, that's when we're going to update the state. For example, you might imagine that sometimes we only want the screen to update based on certain updates. Some updates could be temporary. In this case, let's add comments just to show you what that looks like. So this says that whenever comments is updated, the screen will re-render. Okay. So let's see when that would happen. Okay, so first of all, let's call in our variables that I've already built for you guys. In here, I've made up some posts such that they can be mapped into what we visually see. So I'm just going to replace this array with posts. And now we can see that we have some posts here. So right now we can see that this link takes us to a particular comments page. And while you can type stuff here, it doesn't actually do anything yet. So what we need to do is we first need to make sure that this is linking to only a particular group's set of comments. So what we can do is now we get to connect the parent component to the child component. So the trick here is that we are going to actually pass a function as a particular part. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a function in our app.js at the highest level. And we're just going to make a functional component. And this is going to be a variable. So the important part here is we need to specify what information we need sent to the server in order to register the correct set of comments. And basically, this is going to be our proof of concept that our hooks are related to the content. So what we want here is a particular index. You'll see here that there's one index devoted to each set of comments. So hopefully when we click, we'll generate the proper set of comments. So since the index is the only variable we have to worry about, this is going to be the only variable we're going to intake as a parameter. For now, let's just console.log the index, and from there we can work to make it more specific. So the first thing is we're going to practice sending a particular function as a property. So we want to send this to posts. And in general, we can name this anything, but let's just say on click the comments, we are going to pass the function, which is the variable handle see comments click. So when we click here, this function is going to be registered, and it's our job on the child component to fill in the particular parameters. The only parameter we need to fill in this case is the index. So as a property, we should be able to access it over here. Now we want to do this on the click of this button. So I'm going to say on click. On the click, we are going to pass in the particular index that we're looking at. So in this case, we have I, because that was the second parameter we passed in on the mapping. So if we do props dot we do props dot on click see comments, we are going to pass in the particular variable that we're looking for, which is called IDX and has the value I. Pardon me, I put in the wrong. Should have been this. Okay. So let's check the console. So right now when I click, I'm hoping that, yes, we get 0. All right, let's check this one. We get 1. Great. Okay, great. So now that we are able to see that this is correctly printing which one we're clicking on, the next step is we actually need to load the comments from that click. So let's see what that would look like. Right now, we're mapping to just an empty array, but what we want to be mapping to is the particular set of comments that we are looking at. So in general, I think that we are always going to pass in all of the comments, and then we can access only the comments at the index that we just figured out. So I'm going to say comments equals so now we can access this on the other side. So if we pass in, then we can say props.comments.map. So if I click, all of the comments are listed. So that's not quite going to work. We want only the comments that are relevant to one particular post. So how do we get that? The key is that we need to now pass the information we just got from our printing into a particular property. So we're going to set a use state hook var set per post equals use state -1. So I'm going to set it to -1 since we don't want to pass in something that we're not sure of. If we pass in 0, we're always going to get the comments here if we haven't specified it. Maybe that's okay. So, and then here we can pass this to the property. Okay, great. So now over here, we can say props.comments at props.cur_post_idx, and that will give us the right. So this should fail because props.comments at -1 should not tell us anything. So awesome. Okay, so now we actually have to set this particular index. So here we're going to use the setter to set the cur post to be the index we just got. So now when we click here, you'll notice that we get all of the posts related to post 0. If we click here, you'll notice we get all of the posts related to post 1. Notice there are a lot here and there are a lot here, so that looks about right. And if we click on the last one, hopefully we'll only get these 5. Excellent. Okay, well, that is evidence that we have both set up how to pass up and down our hierarchy. This should go into the beginning of state and effect hooks. And if you guys want more information, I have a full tutorial with exactly how to send comments on the more details page, which I will link in the description. Okay, thanks everybody.